everybody. Welcome back to Hearing Things with Julie and Brad. Today we are tackling a topic that we have not discussed with each other. We talk about literally everything all the time, all day long, constantly. We cover it all. We're excellent communicators. We're very open with one another, and we just talk a lot. This is one thing we have not answered for each other, and purposefully, because we wanted it to be an authentic reaction for the show. Here's today's question. You ready?
I'm answering first?
No, tell the people what the question is.
Right, okay.
Okay, you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go first.
All right, he's going to go first.
Apparently I'm volunteering.
All right, ready? If all of a sudden we could have typical hearing, would you take it? Like just poof?
No.
Why?
So, I was thinking about this, and we did not talk. It's two-pronged, and they're kind of related. I have read way too much science fiction. And someone gives up, someone doesn't have a certain challenge in their life. And that introduces an even bigger challenge in their life. So if I get my hearing, does that mean I lose my eyesight?
Right.
No way. Or like, if I get normal hearing, does that mean that like I'm completely overwhelmed and driven insane by sounds that I've never had to hear before?
Right.
But in a more realistic answer, I would say I like who I am, and who I am is defined in part by my hearing loss.
Right.
And so I wouldn't want to change that, really. I think that there is advantages, like last episode, we talked about some of the advantages of having hearing loss. And of course there's some, because anytime you have a specific situation, it's a give and take. And so we give our hearing and get some communication ability and better eyesight, stuff like that. But I think that it informs who I am. It's one of the crux of who I am, and I like who I am. I'm not perfect, and I could be better, but that's not the same as not liking who I am. And so ultimately, like, because it's so defining part of me, no, I wouldn't. So all that said, what do you think, Julie?
I wouldn't either.
Okay.
Believe it or not. It's such a part of me, and like you, similar to what you had said, it defines you. I don't know who I am without my hearing aids, because there's much a part of me as my eyes, my eye color, my hair color not anymore, because that comes out of a bottle now that I'm old, but just my overall characteristics, my personality, my dimples, they are such a part of my body. I can't imagine life without them. It's also overwhelming to think that all of a sudden everything comes back. All the sounds, a lot of sounds I don't even know exist.
Yeah.
Probably, right? And what actually scares me the most is hearing people's voices authentically, not filtered through hearing aids. Ooh. Will I know people?
That's fantastic.
Will I know who they are?
Yeah.
There's such a comfort in knowing your mother's voice, knowing your brother's voice, your little niece or nephew's little 3-year-old voice talking to you. That would definitely change, because sound would be processed organically instead of filtered through machines. Same thing with music. We know music is my lifeline. That's a big change. And would I be able to really accept and enjoy Frank Sinatra's voice in a way that everyone else hears it versus the way that I've always heard it and how I've grown to love and connect to it? Also, the ambient noise. Trying to sleep at night.
Oh.
Lots of like nails on the floor and sirens outside. I'd never sleep again, because I have the advantage of taking hearing aids out and going right to sleep. I also don't know if I would be able to be as patient with my students, because there would be extra noises that I didn't know about.
Interesting.
And my brain would have to refilter everything through again. I like who I am.
Yeah.
I am perfect. I'm like my counterpart here, so I wouldn't change anything about me, and I like me, and hey, that's it. Couldn't imagine having typical hearing. I wouldn't give these up for anything.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you say about the quality of voice, because I remember when I got my first hearing aids at 23, and so that's a lot older than you. Sure. And I remember for the first 2 weeks, everything sounded horrible, louder, but everything sounded mechanical and artificial because it was. And I still have enough of my hearing where I can listen to music really loud, without the hearing aids. And there's a depth to biological hearing that we lose because it's filtered through sound. And I can't remember if we've filtered through the hearing aids. I can't remember if we've talked about this before, but our hearing is proprietary. So I have Oticon, and Julie has Phonak, and we each hear the world differently.
It blows my mind.
Because the proprietary algorithm, Oticon processes the world's sounds differently than Phonak.
Differently than how I'm hearing it.
And so, that's a great point. Your family, your loved ones' voices would be completely different
Right.
That's awesome. That's a good point.
It's crazy. For all I know, you would sound like Mickey Mouse. I don't know.
I do.
I don't know if you do that.
Oh,
the way I hear you,
funny. I replaced
sounds very different. So it could be I get normal hearing, and all of a sudden you're like.
Speaking of,
would be over
so I was upstairs in the children's room
Yeah.
on Friday, and I was doing something on the computers, and they had replaced one of the mice at the computer with like a really tiny mouse, and I held it up, I'm like, what the hell's with this Minnie Mouse? And I was like, oh wait. So I replaced it with a full-size mouse. So Minnie's in my office now, apparently. But yeah, so it's a great point. Like the way we're used to this, that's like everything will be foreign, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So I don't.
And I'm curious for people with typical hearing if that surprised you or not, because I think there's such a misguided view of people with disabilities that we're not intact, and we would give anything to be tact. Intact again, right?
It's like whelmed, right? Underwhelmed, tact.
I think there's a real misconception about that. So I'm wondering how many people were surprised at us declining this magical opportunity to suddenly have typical hearing. Because again, it's looked at as, oh, those poor dear, oh, you poor thing, you don't have your hearing. Yeah. Guess what? Might be a bit of a shock to some of you that that's not something we would absolutely want.
Yeah. So on the other end, if you do have hearing loss and are watching, would you? Please let us know. There's no right answer here, right? I mean, this is just a thought experiment and gets people thinking about hearing loss in a different way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So your book is actually perfect. I'm going to have you go first.
Yeah, so my book is Deaf Gain. I'm a big word guy, and I cringed when I first heard this because Deaf Gain is an intentional alternative to hearing loss. And so I thought this was just a euphemism to lighten the burden of hearing loss. But it's just a series of essays by different people. It's more like a textbook than anything else, and some of the chapters are really hard. But Deaf Gain was coined because when you have deafness, you do gain things, like we talked about in the last episode about the advantage of hearing loss. And the book talks about centering, right? And so for the completely deaf community, they center their lives around not hearing. The world that we live in centers the world around hearing, and everything branches out from that. So Deaf Gain gets people to think more about a different center. And so you think about not hearing, before you think about hearing. And so it's the opposite for most of the world. And so the book gives you different perspectives on different topics, kind of like we're doing with the show.
I was going to say, this sounds like our blog and our show.
It's more academic, like I said. It's written by both the professors at Gallaudet University. And it just gives you different perspectives of different topics. So it does dovetail very nicely with our show. But it's a great way to see how hearing loss is different, right? Because I know there's a chapter in here talking about how people, if you an insult in the deaf community could be like you're hearing, or that's hearing thinking, because it's so foreign to the way deaf community thinks. I read the book and I felt adrift because I was reading it when I started getting involved in my hearing loss, or being more open about it. And that's not my world. Right. That's the completely deaf world, and I'm not part of that world. But I'm not a part of the hearing world either.
You took the words right out of my mouth. That was exactly what I was going to say.
That's why I started. I think after this book, I read Here and Beyond, and it was more like living with hearing loss in the hearing world. But that book was kind of like a hyper correction for not talking or not thinking about hearing loss for me. But it doesn't. If you are involved in the deaf community, you might really like that book because it really talks about your community. There's actually one thing. We were at a convention a couple weeks ago, and before I got there, the leaders had taken the centerpieces off because it impacted communication around the table because there were enough people that actually signed. And in that book, it talks about sightlines for the deaf, and so architecture is changed when you can't hear and you rely on your sight in order to see.
It's so true. I cannot tell you how many times I've been at weddings with really elaborate, beautiful centerpieces that I would literally have to part the lilies and hello, people on the other side of the table, how you doing? Because I couldn't see to lip read.
Yeah.
So I'm that person that's like, sorry, get this off table 18, gotta go. But that's super important. It's another little thing that I don't think people think about. And like Brad had said, we're not part of the deaf community and deaf culture, but we're not part of the hearing world either.
No.
We're our own little isolated group kind of floating around figuring out where we fit in. And I think that's a really important distinction for people that they may not realize. So, yeah.
So lighten the mood, Julie. What do you got? No? You're not lightening the mood?
One of my absolute favorite public figures was Anthony Bourdain. I can't see anything really. So it's called Down and Out in Paradise, The Life of Anthony Bourdain, and it's by Charles Leerhsen. Anthony Bourdain, to me, was an absolute original, incredible traveler, looking at the world in different ways, wasn't afraid to not say it was on his mind, had great confrontational and, interesting conversations with people, and was all about getting different perspectives together and just being a traveler, not a tourist, is what he always said. And I always took inspiration from him every time I travel, that I try and stay away from the touristy areas or the tourist traps, and just like get out there and see what is really the tenor and pulse of the place where you're visiting. So, for example, we were in Juneau, Alaska, many, many years ago, and people drifted towards like the old mining towns and the little gold rush kind of stuff. Oh, yeah. And I was like, forget this. We walked the other way and ended up at a local blueberry festival sponsored by a radio station. It was awesome. And I wouldn't have thought to do that if I hadn't followed Anthony Bourdain all these years and read his books and followed his shows. And I just miss knowing that he's not on this earth. And it breaks my heart that he was such a tortured soul and unfortunately ended his life himself. And it's just very sad. But his philosophy is just one that I've taken very much to heart. And I just love meeting other people and hearing their perspectives, putting myself out there, wandering into a sketchy-looking bar to see what's behind the door, doing another adventure. He's really inspired me all these years, and I just love reading about him every chance I get.
I'll be hiding behind you. When you walk into the sketchy part, I'll be hiding behind you.
Okay. All right. I love that the 5'4" one of us compared to the 6'2" is the one that's going to get in the scrap and take care of business.
I'm a wuss. I know who I am.
Oh, God. So anyway, Anthony Bourdain.
Yes. Great. That sounds good. That sounds
for
good.
Today.
Yeah. All right. So that's it for this week. Please, like I said earlier, let us know your thoughts on this episode, and if you have your own take on this topic, we'd love to hear from you. All right. See you next week, guys.